Lover of souls, give me the courage to say what you would have me to say and nothing more, and give us all the grace to hear what you would have us hear. Amen. When his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" Which is another way of saying, "Lord, do you want us to burn it all down?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them. The beginning of our gospel today reminds us of Sodom and Gomorrah, one of the early stories in Genesis about the ancestors. And especially since it is Pride Month, we would do well to remember that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, the sin that ends with fire raining down from the sky and destroying the city, is not homosexuality or queerness, which are no sins at all, but what scholars tamely name as inhospitality. It is the sin of many men in the city surrounding a house and demanding that the bodies of its two guests, whom they do not know, be handed over to the men for their control and pleasure. The sin of two daughters in that house being offered up in their place to this mob of men and luckily rejected. Two women whose bodies can be brokered by the men in their life without their say, whose voices were surely ignored, seeing as we don't even get an account of them. As today's gospel recalls that ancient story, we stand with Jesus and his band of disciples as Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. He knows where God is leading him, and he will not be turned away in purpose or direction. In fact, he does something quite unconventional in Luke's gospel. He takes the most direct route to Jerusalem from Galilee. If you've ever looked closely at a map of the Holy Land or been lucky enough to get to go there, you might have noticed that the region of Galilee is located directly above Jerusalem on the same side of the Jordan River. Most Galilean Jews in Jesus' day, when going to Jerusalem, would add many miles to their journey by crossing the Jordan, traveling on the eastern side, and crossing back again to reach Jerusalem. All of this in an attempt to avoid going through Samaria. Jesus does no such thing today. Maybe you were taught as a child, like I was, that the Jews and Samaritans hated each other because they were so different, that they were essentially two separate nations at war. It actually took me signing up for a PhD class at Fordham University on the Judaism of Jesus' day to discover that this characterization is just not true. Samaritans were Jews, just a different type, a different denomination, if we're thinking about it in Christian terms today. They came from the same ancient tribes of Israel, but with being conquered again and again, the Israelites were split up and isolated, and regions developed their faith and practices differently, separately. Judea and Samaria, for example. The Samaritans kept a different religious calendar than the Judean Jews and recognized a different temple, not the one in Jerusalem. Hence, the problems between the Samaritans and the Jews. They were similar and had descended from the same history, but to drastically different results. The Samaritans refused Jesus' group because his face is set toward Jerusalem, toward what in their mind is the wrong temple, the wrong spiritual goal. As Independence Day approaches, we are reminded that Christianity is not America. There are lots of Christians here, but America is not a Christian nation. There are Christians, many Christians, who hold money and governmental power in our country, who would say that America is a Christian nation, that all who live in America should follow the rules of what they call Christian belief. The law's protection to carry a machine gun is not a Christian belief. Telling beloved children of God that they are going to hell or should not have equal rights because they are queer is not a Christian belief. If it is not about inclusion, if it is not about hospitality, if it is not about love, it is not Christian. We share an ancient history with these Christians, and we share a name. But after a point, it feels many times that we are almost unrecognizable from each other. Perhaps you, like I, have avoided going through their territory. Maybe so much that you don't even know any personally right now. Perhaps opportunities for real conversation presented themselves at one time in your friend group or in your family, but the task felt too great. Better to keep it light: sports, food, pets. Whatever you believe, the Supreme Court's decision on Friday about abortion has enormous ramifications. One of the things that I love about the Episcopal Church is that we are a big tent. We have people who believe many different things in our church, and we are united in our worship. We say that no matter what our differences are, we will still come together as one in worship, and that will lead us into discussing our individual differences outside of worship and taking that love of each other and the world out beyond our doors, beyond this building. You may or may not agree with it, but if you are wondering, the Episcopal Church does have an official stance on abortion, and our church has had this position since 1967. You can look it up online. It is this: A, that all life is sacred, and B, because all life is sacred, medical access to abortion is crucial, and whether or not to use abortion is a decision that should be made by a woman with God and her medical team. Wherever you fall in the spectrum of reaction to Friday's ruling, or in the belief of whether or not abortion is a part of medical care that you feel is right for you to use, we should all pay attention to Justice Thomas's opinion, in which he wrote, I quote, "In future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell," end quote. These are the cases that ruled in favor of the right to use contraception, the right to freely choose our sexual partners, and the right for all adults, regardless of sexual orientation, to marry the person whom they choose. Frankly, personally, that terrifies me. A little over 100 years ago, I could not vote. 50 years ago, I could not be a priest in this church, and I could not have a credit card. Many women sitting in our pews here today grew up in a world where they could not have their own bank account or credit card. Because of your bravery and resilience, Because you set your face toward Jerusalem, these things seem ridiculous to us now. Thank you. Not being able to marry the people whom we love, not being able to choose our sexual partners freely, and not being able to have the tools to choose when we have children should seem just as ridiculous. The Samaritans and the Jews were facing the same threats of the Roman Empire. We and our fellow Christians, the ones we feel are so different from us, are facing these same threats: racial injustice, economic violence, corruption, and climate crisis, just to name a few. Jesus bravely walks through Samaria and invites the Samaritans to resist empire and the forces of evil, not by raining down fire, but through love. I wonder where we all would be, how the history of the world would have been changed if these two groups had united. The solution to the things that terrify us is not us versus them. It is not raining down fire from heaven. It is following Jesus out of that fire, having our face set toward Jerusalem, and inviting everyone whom we meet into that transformative love of Christ. And love is not a doormat. Oftentimes, love stands up and says, it shouts, no. It is tracing our journey back to see why a certain version of Christianity got entangled in the American flag and how that has affected all of us who call ourselves Christians in this country. Love is truly seeing these Christian brothers and sisters so separate from us and letting ourselves be seen by them and speaking into their deepest fears and hopes and letting them speak into ours as well. If we are tempted to think that as Christians, our spirituality should be separated from anything to do with how we live and move and vote in this world, we need to remind each other that this is why we're here in church. Our God is incarnate, and because of that, our gospel is inherently political in nature. It has to do with the concrete ways in which we live in this world. America is not Christian, and no one religion or faction of a religion should set the rules that govern us all. Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. He did not look away. In Jerusalem, he was murdered over the political implications of the inclusion he taught, the hospitality he preached, and the love he lived. The way he saw and lived in this world, and the way he invited us to see and live in this world, threatened those with power who would hold on to it for their own purposes. We have decided to follow a bold man, a bold God. No turning back. No turning back.
Amen.